My parents sued me to take 15% of my business, but when the trial started, it only brought more publicity to my establishment and attracted media attention. My parents were in shock. Hey Reddit, I'm here to vent and maybe get some advice. My life has been a wild ride, and honestly, I'm not sure how I made it this far without totally losing my mind. So, here's the thing. I've always felt like an outsider in my own family. My parents hated me like they really, truly hated me. It's not even one of those my parents were tough on me because they cared situations. No, they outright despised me, and I never fully understood why. But man, school was my escape, and if it hadn't been for that, I don't think I'd be here to write this. Growing up, my childhood was full of disappointment. No matter what I did, it was never enough for them. I remember being like 6 or 7 and showing my mom a drawing I was really proud of. I'd spend hours on it, carefully picking out the colors, making sure every detail was perfect. But when I handed it to her, all she did was glance at it and say, "Could have done better." I didn't even get a smile. My dad was worse, silent most of the time, except when he'd explode in anger over the smallest things. I'd walk on eggshells around him, terrified that something, anything, would set him off. It wasn't just them either. My younger brother, Danny, was the golden child. They doted on him like he was the second coming of Christ, showering him with affection and praise for every little thing he did. He got the best toys, the attention, the love, everything I was desperate for but never got. To them, I was just this mistake they were forced to deal with. It was so blatant, too. Birthdays? Forget it. They'd throw these massive parties for Danny, but when it was my turn, it'd be like, "Oh, yeah, here's a cake." If I was lucky. Sometimes, not even that. But here's the thing. I wasn't a bad kid. I was quiet, well-behaved, and did pretty well in school. I think that's what kept me sane. School was my safe haven, the place where people actually liked me. Teachers, classmates. I had no idea why, but they seemed to see something in me that my family refused to acknowledge. Maybe it was because I was polite, helpful, or maybe I just knew how to keep my head down and stay out of trouble. Whatever it was, it worked. At school, I had friends. Real friends. Well, more like acquaintances at first, but they were the only people who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I was never the most popular kid, but I was the kind of person who got along with everyone, and people seemed to appreciate that. I wasn't part of the in crowd, but I wasn't an outcast either. Middle of the pack, I guess you could say. I'd listen when people needed to talk, help them with homework, just be there. And it felt good. It felt like I was worth something, at least to someone, even if my own family couldn't see it. By the time I got to high school, I was thriving in a way. I got really into literature, joined the debate club, and even found myself tutoring some of the kids who struggled in class. I figured, why not help out? It felt good to be needed. But of course, none of that mattered at home. My parents couldn't care less about my grades, my achievements, anything. Danny, meanwhile, coasted through school, barely passing. But every time he brought home a report card with a C on it, my parents acted like he'd just solved world hunger. It was infuriating. I wanted to scream at them, "Why can't you be proud of me for once?" But I never did. I just kept my mouth shut, stayed out of the way, and counted down the days until I could leave for good. And then came college. God, it was like this huge beacon of hope in the distance. I busted my ass to get into a good university, determined to put as much space between me and my family as humanly possible. I applied to schools across the country, anywhere that felt like it could be a fresh start. When I got accepted to a university that was several states away, I didn't hesitate. My parents barely reacted when I told them. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the acceptance letter, shaking with excitement, and my mom just glanced at it and said, "Well, good for you." That was it. No hug, no congratulations. My dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. I should have known better than to expect anything else, but it still hurt. I packed my bags with zero help from them and left as soon as I could. It felt like I was running away, but I didn't care. I needed to get out. And that's where I met Marcus. Marcus, man, he was my saving grace. If there's one person in this world I owe my sanity to, it's him. We met in a psych class during our first semester, and we just clicked. Like, instantly. He was everything I wasn't. Outgoing, confident, and always cracking jokes. But he had this deep side to him too, this understanding of how messed up family dynamics could be. Turns out, he had his own issues with his parents, though his situation wasn't as extreme as mine. We bonded over that shared experience, and before I knew it, we were hanging out all the time. He made college bearable. Hell, he made life bearable. We'd stay up late talking about everything. Life, the future, our shitty families, and how we were going to make something of ourselves no matter what. Marcus had this energy, this drive that I admired. He made me believe that we could actually do it, that we could get away from the toxicity and build something better for ourselves. He had this way of making everything seem possible. We graduated together, and by that time, we were inseparable. I don't know how to explain it, but he felt more like family to me than my real family ever did. After graduation, we both knew we had to get the hell out of there. We packed up everything we had, wasn't much, and moved to a new city. It was supposed to be our fresh start, our chance to leave all the crap behind and build a new life. And for a while it was. But nothing ever stays perfect, does it? It wasn't long before reality started creeping in. We were two broke college grads trying to make it in a city where no one gave a damn about us. We both found jobs, but they were dead-end gigs that barely paid the bills. Still, we were determined to stick it out. Anything was better than going back home. But that's when the weird stuff started happening. It started small at first. I get these strange texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Stuff like, "You can't run forever," or "We know where you are." I thought it was just spam, random nonsense. But then it got weirder. One night, Marcus and I came home to our apartment, and the door was unlocked. We always double-checked the locks, so that freaked us out. Nothing was missing, but it was obvious someone had been inside. There were small signs, things out of place, a window left open. We called the cops, but they didn't take it seriously. Probably just forgot to lock up, they said. But we knew better. It wasn't paranoia. Someone was messing with us. Then one night, it escalated. Marcus and I were out grabbing food when I got a call from a private number. I didn't answer at first, but they kept calling, over and over. Finally, I picked up, and all I heard was breathing on the other end, heavy and slow. I hung up immediately, but my heart was racing. When I told Marcus about it, he tried to brush it off like it was nothing, but I could tell he was freaked out too. We decided to install some extra locks and a security camera just in case. A few days later, we were sitting on the couch watching TV when the doorbell rang. It was late, way too late for visitors, so we both froze. The camera showed no one at the door, but the bell kept ringing. Marcus got up to check it, and the second he opened the door, we heard this loud bang. Someone had thrown a rock through our window, shattering the glass everywhere. We never saw who did it. After that, things calmed down for a while, but the anxiety didn't. Every little noise at night had us jumping out of bed. We both started carrying pocket knives. Not that it would have helped much if someone really wanted to hurt us. Marcus kept telling me we needed to go to the police again, but I wasn't sure what they could do. We didn't have any evidence, just a lot of freaky coincidences. Then, one night, Marcus didn't come home. He'd gone out for drinks with some coworkers, but by midnight, I hadn't heard from him. I called and texted, but there was no response. I was pacing around the apartment, freaking out, convinced something had happened to him. Finally, around 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was Marcus, but when I answered, there was only static. I kept shouting his name, but nothing. The call disconnected, and my heart dropped into my stomach. I spent the next few hours calling hospitals, police stations, anyone who might have seen him. Finally, just as the sun was coming up, Marcus stumbled in the door, covered in dirt and blood. That's when things really got dark. Hey Reddit, I'm back with an update. Last time, I shared how Marcus and I ran away to a new city, trying to escape our crappy families and build a new life for ourselves. Well, things have gotten intense since then. If you haven't read the first part, let me give you a quick recap. Marcus, my best friend, went missing after a series of creepy incidents. I was freaking out, not knowing where he was or what happened to him. But after a night of silence, he stumbled back into our apartment, covered in dirt and blood. That was just the beginning of this whole mess. After that night, Marcus wasn't the same. I mean, can you blame him? He couldn't remember what had happened to him, or so he claimed. But the more I pressed, the weirder things got between us. He started acting distant, always on edge, and for a while, I wondered if he was keeping something from me. He'd disappear for hours, sometimes days, and every time he came back, he looked worse, like he'd been through some kind of war I couldn't see. But every time I asked, he'd brush it off or get defensive. It didn't take long before I decided I needed to figure this out for myself. So, I hired a private detective. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but at that point, I didn't know what else to do. I didn't trust Marcus anymore, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something horrible was about to happen. The guy I hired, Alex Thompson, was a no-nonsense, ex-cop type. He had that gruff, seen-it-all demeanor, and when I told him what was going on, he didn't flinch. He just nodded, took a few notes, and asked for a recent photo of Marcus. Alex started digging into Marcus's whereabouts, tracking his movements whenever he vanished. It took a couple of weeks, but eventually, Alex found out where Marcus was going during his mysterious disappearances. Turns out, Marcus was spending time in some sketchy, run-down part of town. When Alex first told me this, I thought maybe Marcus was getting into drugs or something. Maybe that's why he was acting so weird. But the truth? It was way worse. Alex followed Marcus one night and discovered that he'd been meeting with some shady individuals, people who clearly weren't from around here. When Alex described them to me, it sounded like some sort of underground gang or criminal operation. They'd meet in this old, abandoned warehouse, and it was clear they were up to no good. My stomach dropped when Alex showed me the photos. There was Marcus, standing with these guys, looking like a totally different person. His face was hard, cold, nothing like the Marcus I knew. I felt sick. I confronted Marcus, and at first, he denied everything. But when I showed him the photos, he went pale. That's when he finally told me the truth. Marcus had gotten involved with these guys after he went missing that night. They found him when he was drunk and vulnerable, and they offered him protection and money in exchange for running errands. Nothing big at first. But things escalated. By the time I found out, Marcus was in deep. These people controlled him, and if he didn't do what they asked, they threatened to hurt him. Or worse, hurt me. I was furious, not just at Marcus but at myself for not noticing the signs earlier. But I couldn't let him sink any deeper. We needed a way out. That's when we had this crazy idea. Marcus and I had always talked about starting a business together. It was one of those pipe dreams we'd fantasized about while we were broke college kids, sitting in cheap diners late at night, talking about how we'd be our own bosses one day. Well, this was our chance. We figured if we could scrape together enough money and start something, maybe it'd give Marcus the leverage he needed to break away from these guys. It was risky, but we were desperate. So, we decided to open a small eatery. It wasn't anything fancy, just a hole-in-the-wall place serving cheap but good food. Marcus had some culinary skills from his college days when he worked in a kitchen, and I knew my way around managing things. So we pooled what little money we had left and rented a tiny spot downtown. We called it the Hideaway. Fitting, right? The first year was tough. Really tough. We were barely scraping by, and on top of that, Marcus was still dealing with the people he was tied to. He'd show up late to the restaurant, looking like hell, but we kept pushing forward. The rent was killing us, and sometimes we'd go days without seeing more than a handful of customers. There were nights when we thought about giving up entirely, but we didn't. We couldn't. This was our only shot at getting out of the hole we'd dug ourselves into. Then something unexpected happened. The food caught on. People started coming back, bringing their friends, and before we knew it, the Hideaway became a popular spot in the neighborhood. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, and within 3 years, we had a steady flow of customers. It wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It became this kind of secret gem in the city where people would come to escape the chaos of everyday life, just like we had. The success of the restaurant gave us hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus seemed lighter. He wasn't disappearing as much, and when he did, it wasn't for as long. We were making good money, and for the first time, it felt like we were on the verge of something big. We used the profits to open a second location across town, and when that took off, we opened a third. It felt surreal, like we'd finally made it. We were expanding fast, and the money kept rolling in. But success comes with its own problems. With every new restaurant we opened, the pressure grew. Marcus was still involved with those people, even though he swore he was trying to get out. They didn't care about our success. They saw it as an opportunity. More money meant more leverage for them, and they started demanding bigger favors from Marcus. He tried to keep it hidden from me, but I wasn't stupid. I knew something was off. One night, everything came crashing down. Marcus didn't come home again. I didn't panic this time, at least, not right away. I figured he was just out dealing with whatever mess he'd gotten himself into. But when 2 days passed with no word from him, I knew something was seriously wrong. I called Alex, the detective, and asked him to start looking for Marcus again. A part of me was terrified that this time, I wouldn't find him alive. After a few days of digging, Alex tracked Marcus to a hotel on the outskirts of town. When I got there, I found Marcus unconscious, barely breathing, with a needle sticking out of his arm. My heart sank. I rushed him to the hospital, and after a night of holding my breath, the doctors told me he'd live. But it was close. Too close. The drugs these people had gotten him hooked on. It was killing him, slowly. Marcus was in rehab for months after that. He hit rock bottom, and for a while, I thought he'd never get back up. But against all odds, he fought his way back. When he was released, he swore he was done with those people. We both knew it wouldn't be that easy, but I believed him. For the first time in years, Marcus was finally free. Or at least, that's what I thought. Fast forward a year, and the Hideaway was thriving. We'd opened our 4th location, and the city knew our name. People loved our food, our vibe. It was like we'd built something that mattered, something real. But just when I thought we were in the clear, the past came knocking. One night, after closing up, I got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was cold, methodical. "You thought you could walk away?" they said. My blood ran cold. It was them, the people Marcus had been involved with. "We're coming for what's ours." I couldn't believe it. Marcus had been out of the game for over a year. We'd done everything right, played by the rules, kept our heads down. But they didn't care. To them, Marcus and I were just another asset, something to squeeze for profit. They wanted a piece of our success, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. I tried to hide the call from Marcus, but he found out. When he did, something inside him snapped. He wasn't the same after that. He became paranoid, always looking over his shoulder, convinced that any day now, they were going to show up and take everything we'd built. He started drinking again, hard, and soon enough, he was back to disappearing for days at a time. One night, I came home to find him standing in the kitchen, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a gun in the other. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot and filled with desperation. "They won't stop," he said. "They're going to take everything." I tried to talk him down, to convince him that we could fight this, but he wasn't listening. In his mind, there was only one way out. That night, Marcus packed a bag and disappeared. I haven't seen him since. The restaurant is still running. Hell, it's more successful than ever. But every day, I wonder if they're going to come for me next. Marcus left me a note before he vanished. It was short, just 2 words, "I'm sorry." I don't know if he was apologizing for leaving or for what was about to happen. Maybe both. So here I am, running a chain of restaurants that I built with my best friend, but feeling more alone than ever. I don't know where Marcus is, if he's alive, or if he's ever coming back. But I do know one thing. We can never truly escape our past, no matter how far we run. Hey Reddit, I'm back again. Things have taken a wild turn since my last post. I wish I could say things have calmed down, but honestly, they haven't. If anything, it's been crazier than ever. But somehow, through all the madness, we managed to solve the mess we were in, and yeah, Marcus is back in my life. I'll explain how all that went down, but trust me, it wasn't easy. Nothing ever is, right? So, after Marcus disappeared, I was lost. I mean, completely lost. The restaurant business was booming, but it felt like I was just going through the motions. Every day, I half expected those guys, those criminals Marcus had gotten involved with, to show up at the door, guns blazing, ready to take what they thought was theirs. And every night, I'd lie awake, wondering where Marcus was, if he was safe, or if he was even still alive. A few weeks after Marcus left, I got another call. This time, it wasn't just some random threat. It was a direct demand. The voice on the other end told me that Marcus had stolen from them before he vanished. I had no idea what they were talking about, but they insisted Marcus had taken a large sum of money that apparently belonged to them. And now, they expected me to pay up. Look, I don't know what Marcus took. I told the guy on the phone, my heart pounding in my chest, but I don't have it. I'm just trying to run a business here. The guy laughed. It was this cold, cruel sound that sent chills down my spine. You're running Marcus's business, which means you're in this just as deep as he is. Pay up, or we'll collect in other ways. They gave me a deadline, a week to come up with the money. Problem was, I didn't know how much they wanted. Every time I asked, the answer was different. Sometimes it was $50,000. Other times, it was $100,000. They were messing with me, playing some sick game, and I had no idea what the real stakes were. I was freaking out. I didn't have that kind of money lying around. Sure, the restaurants were doing well, but we were constantly reinvesting in the business. Expanding meant high overhead, and I couldn't just pull cash out of thin air. I was desperate, and I didn't know who to turn to. That's when I made the decision to call Alex, the private detective I'd hired before. He'd found Marcus once, and maybe, just maybe, he could help me figure out what the hell was going on now. Alex wasn't thrilled to be dragged back into this mess, but he agreed to help. After all, he'd seen firsthand how bad things had gotten with Marcus and these criminals. Over the next few days, Alex started digging into Marcus's last known whereabouts. He tracked down old contacts, visited the shady warehouse where Marcus had met those guys, and eventually, he uncovered a lead. Apparently, Marcus had gotten tangled up with a local criminal syndicate that specialized in money laundering and loan sharking. They'd been using small businesses like ours to funnel dirty money, and Marcus had unwittingly become a part of their operation. The money they claimed Marcus had stolen? It wasn't exactly stolen. It was part of a larger scheme they were running, and Marcus had walked away with more than they wanted him to. But here's the kicker. Marcus hadn't even known he was taking their money. He thought it was his cut from some legitimate business deals they'd helped him with. In reality, it was all a front. Alex's investigation led us to a man named Roman. Roman was high up in the syndicate, and if anyone knew what was really going on, it was him. But getting to Roman wasn't going to be easy. This guy was like a ghost. No known address, no social media, nothing. He operated in the shadows, and the only way to reach him was through his right-hand man, a guy named Eddie. Eddie was an ex-con with a reputation for being ruthless. He ran a bar in one of the rougher parts of town, a place where the cops rarely ventured and where the patrons were just as shady as the people running it. Alex and I decided to pay Eddie a visit, though I was seriously doubting our chances of making it out without a few bruises. Still, I was determined to get Marcus back and end this nightmare once and for all. When we got to the bar, Eddie was easy to spot. A hulking guy with tattoos snaking up both arms, leaning against the counter like he owned the place. And well, he kind of did. Alex and I walked up to him, trying to look confident even though my stomach was doing flips. "We need to talk to Roman," Alex said, his voice steady. Eddie raised an eyebrow, sizing us up. "And who the hell are you?" "We're looking for Marcus," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "We know Roman's got information." Eddie chuckled, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "Marcus, huh? Haven't seen that guy in a while. But I know who you are," he said, pointing at me. "You're the guy running those little restaurants downtown. Heard they're doing pretty well." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. He knew who I was. That wasn't good. "I'll cut to the chase," Eddie said, his tone suddenly serious. "Roman doesn't talk to just anyone. You want information? You'll have to prove you're worth his time." Alex shot me a look that said, "We're in over our heads," but I ignored it. I was too far gone to back out now. "What do you want?" I asked, my hands sweating. Eddie leaned in close, his breath reeking of smoke and cheap whiskey. "There's a guy, another business owner. He owes Roman a lot of money. Problem is, he's skipping town. You help us track him down, and maybe I'll put in a word with Roman for you." It was a setup, and I knew it. But what choice did I have? We agreed, though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. Over the next few days, Alex and I tracked down the guy Eddie wanted. His name was Frank, and he ran a small auto shop on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't hard to find him. He wasn't exactly laying low. We found him packing up his things, getting ready to leave town for good. When we confronted him, he practically begged us not to turn him over to Eddie and Roman. "They'll kill me," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't know what they're capable of." I looked at Alex, torn. If we didn't deliver Frank, we'd never get to Roman. But handing him over felt wrong. I didn't want more blood on my hands. In the end, we let him go. It was a risk, but I couldn't live with myself if I had gotten someone killed just to solve my own problems. When we returned to Eddie's bar empty-handed, I braced myself for the worst. Eddie wasn't happy, to say the least. But he didn't kill us. Instead, he gave us a warning. "You're lucky I don't feel like dealing with this right now," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But don't think Roman's forgotten about you." That night, I was sure everything was falling apart. I'd failed to deliver on Eddie's demand, and now I had a target on my back. Worse, Marcus was still out there somewhere, and I had no idea how to find him. I was starting to lose hope. But then, out of nowhere, Marcus came back. It was late one evening, and I was locking up the restaurant when I heard a knock on the back door. My heart stopped. I opened the door cautiously, expecting the worst, but there he was, Marcus, looking disheveled but alive. Before I could say anything, he grabbed me and pulled me into a hug. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry for everything." I stood there, shocked, but relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Marcus was back, and for the first time in months, I felt like things might actually be okay. We sat down and talked for hours. Marcus told me everything. How he'd been hiding out, trying to stay off the radar after realizing just how deep he was in with Roman's crew. He'd been scared, ashamed, and unsure of how to fix things. But after months of running, he realized he couldn't keep going like this. He had to face the consequences, whatever they were. Together, we decided to confront Roman directly. It was risky, hell, it was borderline suicidal, but we were done living in fear. Alex helped us set up a meeting with Roman. This time, there were no middlemen, no goons. Just Marcus, me, Alex, and Roman sitting at a table in a dimly lit warehouse, surrounded by the kind of men who wouldn't hesitate to put a bullet in our heads if things went south. Roman was older than I expected. Mid-50s, maybe, with graying hair and a steely gaze that could cut through glass. He didn't say much at first, just listened as Marcus explained everything. When Marcus finished, Roman leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Roman said, lighting a cigar. "But guts don't pay debts." We didn't have the money they wanted, and Roman knew it. But what he wanted more than money was control over our business. He laid it out simply. If we handed over a percentage of our restaurant's profits, he'd let us live. He'd take his cut and leave us alone. No more threats, no more harassment. It was a tough pill to swallow. I didn't want to give up control of something we'd worked so hard to build, but what choice did we have? We agreed to his terms, though I hated myself for it. Over the next few months, things slowly started to improve. Roman kept his word, for the most part. He took his cut, but he didn't interfere with how we ran the business. Marcus was back for good, and we started focusing on what we did best, expanding the hideaway. We opened 3 more locations, each one more successful than the last. The restaurants became a staple in the city, known for their unique vibe and incredible food. People loved the story behind it, 2 friends who built something from nothing, despite all the odds. But as we grew, so did our problems. Managing a chain of restaurants is no small feat, and the pressure was intense. Marcus and I were constantly working, trying to keep up with the demand while also dealing with the ever-present shadow of Roman and his crew. They were always watching, always waiting for an opportunity to take more. Then came the day when Roman pushed too far. We were preparing to open our newest location, a massive space in the heart of the city, when Roman showed up unannounced. He wasn't there to congratulate us. Instead, he demanded a bigger cut, double what we'd originally agreed on. Marcus lost it. He'd had enough of being bullied, and he wasn't about to let Roman walk all over us again. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus snapped, standing up from the table. "We've paid you more than enough. This ends now." Roman didn't flinch. He just looked at Marcus with that same cold smile. It ends when I say it ends. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment, I thought we were about to witness a full-blown fight. But then, something unexpected happened. Alex stepped in. "I think it's time we settled this once and for all," Alex said, his voice calm but firm. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, tossing it onto the table in front of Roman. "This is everything we've gathered on you over the past few months. Every illegal deal, every shady business move, every person you've hurt along the way. You walk away now, or this goes public." Roman's smile faltered for the first time. He opened the folder and quickly flipped through the pages. I didn't know what Alex had found, but whatever it was enough to make Roman pause. "You've got guts too," Roman muttered, closing the folder and standing up. "Fine. You win, for now. But don't think this is over." With that, he walked out, leaving us in stunned silence. We'd done it. We'd stood up to Roman, and for the first time in years, we were free. The months that followed were the best of my life. Marcus and I continued to grow the business, expanding the hideaway into other cities, and our success only grew from there. We hired new staff, met incredible people along the way, and created a business we were truly proud of. We still had challenges, of course. Running a business is never easy, but compared to what we'd been through, it all felt manageable. Marcus was happier than I'd ever seen him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we'd finally found the peace we'd been searching for. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far we've come. From two broke kids trying to escape our toxic families to running a chain of successful restaurants, we've defied every odd thrown our way. And through it all, Marcus has been by my side, my brother in every way that matters. Life isn't perfect, it never is, but it's good. It's better than I ever imagined it could be. And after everything we've been through, I think we've earned that. Hey Reddit, I'm back again, and this time, things have taken a turn that I never saw coming. After all the chaos with Marcus, the criminal syndicate, and our journey to building a business empire, I thought we were finally in the clear. But of course, life has a funny way of kicking you just when you start feeling comfortable. This time, though, the threat didn't come from criminals or shady business partners. No, it came from somewhere much closer to home, my parents. I haven't mentioned them much in the previous parts because, frankly, I didn't think they deserved any space in my life story. But they found their way back in, and in the most twisted way possible. Let me explain. After Marcus and I had dealt with the criminal syndicate, life finally started to settle into a normal rhythm. We were expanding the hideaway, opening up new locations in major cities, and it felt like nothing could stop us. Business was booming, and we were getting attention from local and national media for being a success story, two guys who'd started from nothing and built an empire. It was the kind of thing people eat up. And then, out of nowhere, I get a phone call. It was from my mother. That's right, the same woman who barely spoke to me, unless it was to criticize me when I was growing up. The same parents who treated me like dirt while my brother Danny was their pride and joy. At first, I didn't even believe it was her. I mean, I hadn't heard from her in years. Not a call, not a text, not a birthday card, nothing. And now she was calling me? Curiosity got the best of me, so I picked up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. Her voice came through, all sugary and sweet, which immediately put me on edge. "It's been so long, dear. We've been hearing so much about you and Marcus and your wonderful restaurants. Your father and I are so proud of everything you've accomplished." I stood there, stunned. Proud? Proud? These were the same people who never gave a damn about anything I did. They barely acknowledged my existence when I lived under their roof. But now, all of a sudden, they were proud? I didn't even know how to respond at first. I just sort of muttered, thanks, I guess. But then she got to the point. "Well, we were thinking, since we supported you all these years, gave you a roof over your head, and helped you become the successful man you are, it's only fair that we see a share of the success. You know, as a thank you for everything we did for you." I could feel the anger rising in my chest. A thank you? For what? For the years of neglect? For treating me like I was nothing while Danny got everything? For making me feel like an outsider in my own home? "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What exactly do you want? She didn't miss a beat. Oh, not much. Just a small percentage of your business. After all, we're family, and family shares in each other's successes, right? I nearly dropped the phone. They wanted a cut of the business I had built with Marcus from the ground up. The same parents who had treated me like garbage now wanted to cash in on my success? I could barely contain my rage. Mom, I said, trying to keep my cool. You and Dad had nothing to do with this business. Marcus and I built it on our own. You can't just... She cut me off. Oh, I see. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? Well, you'll be hearing from our lawyer. And with that, she hung up. I stood there, stunned, staring at my phone like it had just exploded. They were actually serious. My parents, who had done nothing but make my life miserable, were threatening to sue me for a share of the business I had worked so hard to build. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. It was so absurd, but at the same time, I knew they were serious. And I knew that if they followed through on this, it could turn into a nightmare. The next few days were a blur. Sure enough, I received an official letter from their lawyer, demanding a significant percentage of the business, 15% to be exact. They claimed it was compensation for the years they had invested in me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. They were actually framing this as if they had been some kind of supportive, nurturing parents who had helped me succeed, rather than the emotionally neglectful people they really were. I called Marcus immediately after receiving the letter. He was just as pissed as I was. This is ridiculous, he said, pacing around the office. They have no claim to any of this. It's just a cash grab because they see how successful we've become. I agreed, but that didn't make it any less stressful. My parents had hired a pretty well-known lawyer, and they were serious about taking me to court. Over the next few weeks, legal paperwork started flying back and forth. I hired my own lawyer, a guy named Sarah Jeffries, who specialized in family law. She was sharp, no nonsense, and didn't hesitate to tell me that this case could drag on for a long time. And drag on it did. The lawsuit became this huge, messy affair. My parents argued that they had provided for me financially during my childhood, and that without their support, I never would have been able to start the business. They even dragged Danny into it, claiming that the family had always supported each other and that I was somehow breaking that bond by not sharing my success. Of course, that was all bullshit. The reality was that I'd left home as soon as I could, built my life with no help from them, and they were now trying to rewrite history to make themselves look like the victims. The court case dragged on for months, and the whole time, I was dealing with the stress of managing our rapidly expanding business. Every time I walked into one of our restaurants, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we built was at risk, all because of this ridiculous lawsuit. But here's where things get interesting. The lawsuit, as terrible as it was, actually started drawing attention to the hideaway. At first, it was just local news picking up on the drama. Successful restaurant mogul sued by his own parents. You know, the kind of story that grabs headlines. But then, it went viral. People started talking about it online, and before I knew it, our restaurants were getting flooded with new customers, people who wanted to support me and see what all the fuss was about. It was insane. What should have been this awful, private family matter turned into a PR goldmine. We started getting interviewed by major media outlets, and suddenly, everyone was talking about the hideaway, not just for our food, but for the insane backstory that was unfolding in the courts. It wasn't the kind of attention I wanted, but hey, if it brought more business, I wasn't going to complain. Still, the lawsuit itself was brutal. My parents were relentless, and their lawyer was even worse. They dug into every aspect of my life, trying to find anything they could use against me. At one point, they even tried to claim that Marcus and I had been funneling money through shady deals with our restaurants, a claim that was so ridiculous, even the judge rolled his eyes when he heard it. But the worst part? Danny, my brother, who had always been the golden child, actually testified against me. He sat there in court, smiling like the smug little prick he is, and talked about how ungrateful I had always been and how I had never appreciated the sacrifices our parents had made for me. I was furious. I couldn't believe he was actually willing to stab me in the back like that, all for the chance at a payday. But then again, I shouldn't have been surprised. Danny had always been the favorite, Always the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I guess he figured siding with them was his best shot at staying in their good graces and maybe getting a cut of the business himself. As the trial dragged on, I started to feel like I was losing. Not just the case, but my sanity. The stress was getting to me. I wasn't sleeping, I was barely eating, and every day felt like a new battle. Marcus tried to keep me focused, reminding me that we had built something great, and that no matter what happened, we'd get through this. But even he could tell that the lawsuit was taking its toll on me. Then came the breaking point. I was in the middle of a meeting with our expansion team when I got a call from my lawyer, Sarah. She sounded excited, something I hadn't heard from her in months. "I've got good news," she said. "We just got a ruling from the judge." My heart practically stopped. And we won. I don't think I've ever felt such a mix of relief and disbelief in my life. After all the stress, all the drama, all the sleepless nights, we had actually won. The judge ruled that my parents had no legal claim to my business, that they had provided minimal financial support during my upbringing, which was putting it kindly, and that I owed them nothing. I couldn't believe it. It was over. I had won. The best part? The ruling wasn't just a quiet courtroom victory. No, this ruling made headlines. The media had been following the case since the beginning, and when news broke that I had won, it was like wildfire. The story was everywhere: social media, news channels, even morning talk shows. People loved the narrative. The underdog who had been sued by his greedy parents and came out on top. The attention was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Our restaurants were packed every night, and we were expanding faster than ever. People weren't just coming for the food. They were coming to support the guy who had stood up to his toxic family and won. It was wild. I'd gone from being a stressed-out wreck to riding this insane wave of success, all because my parents had tried to take me down. They wanted a piece of the business, but all they did was give us the best advertising we could have ever asked for. And as for my parents, well, they disappeared from my life again after the ruling. I haven't heard from them since, and honestly, I'm fine with that. They got what they deserved. Danny, too. He hasn't reached out, though I heard through the grapevine that he was furious about losing his chance at a payday. Good riddance. As Marcus and I continued to expand the hideaway, we brought in new people, real talent who helped us take the business to the next level. One of those people was Lisa, a brilliant chef we hired to revamp our menu as we moved into larger cities. Lisa was a firecracker, bold, creative, and not afraid to speak her mind. She quickly became an integral part of the team, and her vision helped us redefine what the hideaway was all about. But even as we grew, there were new challenges. Expanding into other cities meant dealing with new competition, and not everyone was thrilled to see us moving in. One of our biggest competitors was a restaurant chain called Urban Tastes, run by a guy named Tom Winters. Tom was known for being ruthless. He'd do anything to crush the competition, and when he heard about the hideaway's success, he made it his personal mission to take us down. At first, Tom's attacks were subtle. He'd spread rumors about us, claim that our food wasn't as good as the hype, and even paid food critics to give us bad reviews. But when that didn't work, he got more aggressive. He started buying up property near our restaurants, opening Urban Taste locations right across the street from us, trying to steal our customers. It was dirty, but it wasn't illegal. Marcus and I knew we had to fight back, but we didn't want to sink to his level. Instead, we focused on making the hideaway even better. Lisa's new menu was a huge hit, and we started offering unique experiences, pop-up events, themed nights, and even cooking classes. Our customers loved it, and no matter how many Urban Taste locations Tom opened, people kept coming to the hideaway. But Tom wasn't done. One night, after closing up our flagship location, I got a call from one of our managers. The restaurant had been vandalized, windows smashed, graffiti sprayed all over the walls, and the kitchen trashed. I was furious. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. We installed security cameras and tightened up our protection, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. Tom wasn't going to stop until he'd driven us out of business. I couldn't let that happen. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I confronted him directly. I showed up at one of his Urban Taste locations, walked straight into his office, and told him to his face that I knew what he was doing. He didn't deny it, didn't even try to pretend like he was innocent. He just smirked and said, "It's business, kid. Get used to it." But I wasn't about to let him push us around. I had a plan. Over the next few weeks, Marcus, Lisa, and I put our heads together and came up with a new strategy. We started hosting community events at our restaurants, charity dinners, fundraisers for local causes, and even cooking competitions. We got the neighborhoods involved, made the Hideaway a place where people felt like they were part of something bigger than just a restaurant. And it worked. People flocked to us in droves, not just because of the food, but because they believed in what we were doing. Tom couldn't compete with that. No matter how many Urban Taste locations he opened, he couldn't replicate the sense of community we'd built. In the end, Tom backed off. He realized he couldn't beat us, not with the tactics he was using. The Hideaway had become more than just a business. It was a movement, and no one could take that away from us. Now, years later, Marcus and I are still running the Hideaway, and it's bigger than we ever imagined. We've opened locations in cities all across the country, and we're still growing. Lisa is a partner now, and her vision continues to push us forward. We've built something amazing, and no matter how many challenges we face, I know we'll keep moving forward. As for my parents, they're still out of the picture, and honestly, I'm better off without them. They tried to take me down, but all they did was make me stronger. Reddit, life has been one hell of a ride. But if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that you can't let the past define you. You have to fight for what you believe in, and sometimes that means standing up to the people who are supposed to love you the most. I did, and now I'm finally free.